Hey there, this is Keenan Fry, and you're watching the Acid Drip. We're back with some more of the letter Y, and I'm trying to really stay on top of this and get as much done as possible. Try and get further along with it. So, I've made a couple of videos in the last few weeks um, to kind of just demonstrate where I'm at. I worked on this earlier before I started the recording. I started working on this kind of column of the lower spine. This is going into the Y shape, the lower leg of the Y. But before I get started, I just wanted to get some stuff off my chest. So, not too long ago, my grandmother died, and she spent the last 15 years of her life waiting to die. She spent most of her life addicted to opioids because she had really early on osteoporosis, which is a really painful form of arthritis. She got it in her early 30s, late 20s, due to her pregnancies. So she had my Aunt Cheryl when she was 17, then she had my Uncle Mike, and then my mom. And, you know, something happened that caused a hormonal shift and caused this osteoporosis. And so she had early on hip surgeries, and then she just spent the rest of her life basically addicted to opioids because that's what they gave you back in the 1940s. You know, my grandmother graduated high school in 1945, just to give you an idea. Um, so anyway, one thing I'll show you is I did a Photoshop repaint of her photo for the funeral. So I'll pull that up and just show you uh, kind of what I did. So I'm going to. Okay, so I don't think I have the exact original photo. What I can do is just open a different version of it later on. But this is my grandmother in 1945. So anyway, she she had a lot of problems, and she made a lot of really weak decisions throughout her life. And there was a lot of abuse that went on in my grandmother's house. She kind of psychologically abused my mom, and then of course my grandfather was a bit of an alcoholic, and they would fight physically, fist fight, and he would beat her. But she was also an alcoholic too, in addition to being addicted to opioids, hardcore painkillers, and she was also a hardcore gambler. So was my grandfather, and they lost four houses or three houses to foreclosure. It was the fourth house that they had that stuck, and this was while my mom was very young. So my mom went through adolescent kind of homelessness, and then that kind of like traumatized her a bit. She lived with her aunt for a lot of her youth because they lost the house, and then you know, multiple houses, and then a lot of things just went on with that. Um, I'm not going to give you the whole history of my family. I just am kind of giving you a little splash of that background. But my grandmother's passing was very painful, and she spent the last 15 years, 20 years or so of her life waiting to die. Most of it spent bedridden, and she used to say very vicious things, and she was pretty vehement about defending her mean and very cruel comments. She would say pretty lousy things to my mom in front of the family, in front of me, and in front of my sister as well. My sister is not going to be attending the funeral because of personal differences with the family. So, right now, at this point in time, my family's actually been kind of ripped apart, and I'm kind of angry about things because my mom, in my opinion, has not been handling the death very well because she's been fighting with her brother and sister over what I would consider very petty things. And then she comes home and complains a lot about it, which really pisses me off because I'm kind of tired of listening to it. Um, and I had a fight with my dad about it. I got into a fight with my dad where I just told him I'm so fucking sick of it. And I started arguing with my dad. And it was one of the worst arguments we've had in a long time. And I feel bad because my grandmother's life story boils down to her not necessarily being a bad person, but being a very weak person and consistently making weak decisions, which is incredibly unfortunate. So, due to some circumstantial issues, I was not able to visit her um, during the last year of her life. I was just barely able to get 2 visits in with her before she died. But usually I would go visit her twice, sometimes 3 times a month. So, you know, every other week usually. She lived in San Francisco. We live in basically San Carlos, the peninsula. So it's like a half-hour drive to her house. And that last year I didn't visit her. It was very painful because she was pretty kind to me um, for some pretty bizarre reasons. I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but she was in denial for most of her life, circumstantially speaking. She was in denial for most of her life about her behavior. And it was a very unfortunate thing because while I was talking, I saw something that irritated me. This splotch here, I didn't quite fully blend this out. I should have blended this better. I already ordered the photos for her memorial service, so it doesn't matter if I fix it, but I probably should have fixed that a little bit more before I ordered the photos, but it doesn't matter. No one's going to notice it. Um, so anyway, um, Gloria's life boils down to a series of really bad mistakes, really weak decisions, her being a very weak person, and she wasn't necessarily like that towards me. And towards the end of her life, during those last 2 visits I had with her, um, she could barely talk, and she was also fairly senile, but there was kind of like an urgency to her speech. And she had terrible tremors, so she shook a lot, and her voice kind of undulated a lot. And so it made it very difficult to typically understand her. But in those last 2 visits and those last 2 conversations, there was an urgency and clarity to her voice. And her tremors were a little bit weaker, and her voice was a little bit more clear. And it may have been because she was passing and her body was just kind of giving out, or it may have been a combination of that and what I think was a slight amount of mental fortitude, because she had a desire to say something to me during those last 2 visits. She died 7 or 8 days after my second visit with her. I was supposed to see her one more time, and she actually died before I could have a third visit with her. But she got pretty good closure with me during those 2 visits because she kind of forced out what she wanted to say. And she died at age 95. And basically during those 2 conversations, she basically just repented and apologized for just 95 years of mistakes, which is kind of a horrific thing to experience. So I know that this conversation is kind of unpleasant, but the piece of advice that I hope that you take from this is When I speak at my grandmother's funeral, I'm going to speak the truth, my truth. And there's been a lot of ugly fighting with the family, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to address that. But I think, fortunately, by addressing some of it when the wake happens, maybe things will get better. Because, you know, one thing Gloria used to do is she used to gamble my grandfather Tim's paycheck away. And then he'd just lose his mind and start swinging. Um, and then my grandmother would start screaming, and she'd run into my mom's room, and they would barricade the door with her bed. And then my grandmother would stay up all night chain smoking in the bedroom, sitting on my mom's bed chain smoking, and my mom would have to sleep on the floor. And all night long, Tim would be pounding on the door because Gloria gambled the paycheck away. Um, and then what would end up happening is my mom would have to get up and go to school the next day. That was her childhood. So I have a lot of problems with my mom because she's very bitter and resentful. And I wish she would stop being that way because it has a negative impact on me. And then there are times where I'm bitter and resentful about things, and I wish I could stop being that way because that has a negative impact on the other members of my family, like my father, who I had that fight with, and I regret deeply having said what I said to him. So the point is, odds are there are things you can do during the course of your life that can redirect the outcome of your life. And I'm going to have to speak at Gloria's funeral about the mistakes she made. And my suggestion to you is that when you think about the people who will speak at your funeral, you don't want them to speak about you the way I'm going to have to speak about Gloria and the rest of my family. And I'm not saying that to condemn them. I'm saying it because it has to be said so that the cycle of abuse can be broken. And that was probably the biggest thing that Gloria apologized for in those last two conversations that I had with her before she died. She apologized for the years and years and years of abuse. I think when anyone dies, they're going to have some regrets. I think that's a human thing. I think that's part of being human, to have regrets. I'm 30. I'm not anywhere near dying. And I have regrets. A lot of them I'm going to take with me to my grave. But to have so many regrets that the only way someone who loves you can describe the course of your life is by doing so through the context of regret, a litany of regrets. That's really something that you should try to reconcile with yourself so that you don't make those mistakes and those weak decisions that Gloria made. I don't hate anyone in my family. I just sometimes hate how they act. And I don't even hate the outcome. I just want it to end. Sometimes I get angry at myself. And then I get frustrated because I'm not doing what I need to do to move forward. And there are times where someone really hurts me and they do things to stop my growth. That's happened recently at San Francisco State University. I had some problems with my former department, and what happened there really, really hurt me. And I think all of these things happening at once, because I had a health problem. Basically, the health problem was I was getting screened for cancer. I was getting screened for a form of testicular cancer. I don't have cancer, but I have a precursor to a form of testicular cancer. It's not actually cancer. I don't want to scare people. I have benign cysts, but it's related to that area of the body. But at first, when I was being screened, they legitimately thought I had a form of cancer, which was terrifying. That happened in January, and that put a lot of stress on me. And then a bunch of shit happened in my department. And then, of course, Gloria died. And then when Gloria died, all of that tension that had been boiling under the pot erupted. So that's a lot. And I had a lot to prove to my new department to show that, what happened last semester was a fluke, and that that doesn't actually represent my academic potential or professional conduct. And it has a lot to do with people lying about my performance. But I'm not going to get further into that because that's only going to be very political and controversial. But having gone through these last 3 months in probably one of the most stressful situations imaginable, and then lashing out at my father because I'm unhappy, because I'm angry, because I'm upset about things, that's not helpful. I don't want to act like Gloria. And it's unfortunate that that's really the only thing I can say about her. She was kind to me, but there was a sort of narcissism to that on her part. And it's very unfortunate that that's how things turned out. So don't make weak decisions. Take accountability for the things that you can take accountability for. And if there's something that's outside of your hands, go through the process that you need to go through to come to the point of acceptance. For me, I get really angry. I get really angry. I get incredibly angry. And it's toxic because people can smell it. And it almost affected me in an irreversible way. But thank God it hasn't. I still have the chance to move forward. And that's what I plan on doing. I finished painting Gloria's portrait. It took a long time repainting it. There were tears in it. So I'm pretty proud of how this came out. I put my signature here at the bottom. But this is basically the original portrait as intended. But there were a lot of tears because the microfilament paper had disjointed over time. It wasn't stored properly. So, yeah, if you're interested in learning how to do photo repair, I might do a tutorial on how to repair old photographs and show you how to kind of paint things in. I'll show you a quick zoom in. So if you look at her nose, you can actually see the brush strokes. I'm going to increase my cursor. you can actually see the brush strokes where I painted in her nose again. This whole nose had been ripped out, so her whole nose was gone, and I repainted it. This shadow right here, this has all been repainted. Her eye has been completely repainted. This corner's been completely repainted. The eyebrow was repainted. You can see, if I really zoom in, you can see the hash marks where I repainted this eyebrow and over here. This portion of the eye was repainted and repaired. You can see some brush strokes here. And then, of course, shit, I hit the wrong button. Fucking shit, I'm tired. Okay, here I completely repainted her hair. So, and then this is all completely repainted. This whole section here, this is repainted. So, like, I'd say about 50% of her was repainted. This was repainted. This was pretty much like white paper, because it had been torn out. And then obviously, whoops, I did some shading, just to create better separation. I repaired her chin and did a little bit there to repair that. I repaired the collar. I repaired this piece of the collar. You can see the brush strokes there. This shadow was damaged. I repaired it. Her neck was repaired. There's a few brush strokes there to help separate her shoulder from the collar. And then, of course, this was painted in because the photo wasn't the right size for the final print. So I had to, resize it and then paint in the background to blend in with the photograph and kind of give it that stained, aged sort of tint. But yeah, it was very difficult. And I spent weeks doing this, and then, finally ordered the photo today. And while I was working on the photo, I kind of briefly touched up the ear, but I didn't quite finish touching it up, obviously, because I forgot to touch this texture up. I actually repainted this section here too, and then you can see that I masked around her hair to kind of create a better trim around her head, because her hair was just an absolute mess. So I cleaned up her hair so there'd be better separation, depth of separation. So this was probably one of the biggest projects I've ever undertaken in Photoshop. Not because it was a ton of work per se, like I didn't paint the whole thing from the ground up. It's just that I've never really done a touch up like this to this extent, and a lot of it was about nuance and using restraint, trying to keep as much of the original photo present. There's a lot of grain that kind of gives texture and weight to the photograph that I wanted to preserve. But there were certain things I needed to fix. Here's another thing I forgot. I totally repainted this part of her scalp. You can see the brush strokes there. This was, I mentioned I painted the hair, but I forgot to mention her scalp here was repaired. But the central part of her face, the luminescence of this cheek, her lips. I actually did do a little bit of work on this part of the lip here as well. There's a lot of work on this. But most of her cheek, this part right here, and her chin were intact. This cheek was kind of intact. Some of her eyes were intact. Her ear had to totally be repaired. And I tried repainting the whole ear, but I ended up just covering it up because I just couldn't get it right. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is that this was an exercise. This is one of my biggest projects because it was an exercise in restraint. This was about tastefulness, less is more, laying back on my editing skills and not going in and fixing every little thing and getting hyper obsessed, but laying back, letting the grain of the original photo come through, and doing as much as I can to restore the photo to an authentic version of itself, but then adding certain characteristics to help what was originally there stand out more. That's what the shadowing was. That was what these brushstrokes are that repaired her shoulders and these shadow areas here. But for the most part, if something wasn't there, I didn't add it. So the goal was not to add something that was not originally there. The goal was to simply repair what was there and to enhance a little bit, but not to add. This video was really difficult to record. Obviously, it's coming at a very poignant time in my life, because things have just been really fucking chaotic. I do want to reiterate, I don't have cancer. I have benign cysts. So, I don't want to say that I have cancer because there are people I know who are actually going through chemotherapy and radiology, and I'm not. But, I've been going through a lot lately, and, I do need to cut myself some slack, but I also need to pick up some of the slack as well because I can't just get angry and snap like I did earlier today, because that's just so immature and inappropriate. So I'm going to apologize to my dad probably tomorrow, give him some space, and then apologize to him tomorrow. And yeah, I know you guys were expecting a letter Y update, but I don't know. This video has just morphed. But I appreciate you guys listening to me talk about this photograph and my family. Family's the hardest thing in the world. You have to love them no matter what, but sometimes they're the hardest people in the world to love. Other times, they're the ones who are the first to forgive you and show you love. So it's really important to value and respect your family. I think that's the best thing I can say about this. Thank you for your time. I promise that the next video will be nothing like this. It'll be a full-blown art update that's really focused on actually updating the font set and showing you my progress. But yeah, thanks for watching. I'm Keenan Fry, and this is the Acid Drip. See you next time.